Hello my lovelies and welcome back to my channel. Today is day 3 of our Gaia sew along. Today we're going to be working on the outside slip pocket and we're going to be assembling the exterior of the bag. So we have something pretty to admire at the end of today. Let's start with the outer pocket. There's two options including in the pattern. One that has a magnetic snap, which is the one that I'll be doing, and one that has a seam down the center. I do have a big phone, so I like my my center to be as big as possible, so no center seam. So I'll be doing the magnetic snap for that reason, but you can always opt for the other one, or just skip the magnetic snap altogether and just have a simple slip pocket. For now, let's just work on this. So take your lining piece and your main of the outer pocket and place them right sides together along that top curved edge. And we're going to be stitching only along the top for now with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and go slow to follow that beautiful curve. Using some pinking shears or a rotary cutter that has a pinking blade, so you can use pinking shears, or I like to use my rotary cutter that has a pinking blade. Go ahead and trim the excess seam allowance, so this way when we fold, I was out of frame because I needed the cutting mat. So I find it easier to have like a rotary cutter blade that's pinking shear than instead of these that are heavy. Okay, so now you want to fold them so the outside is out, and you're going to top stitch. Having that part removed, the excess removed, will make it easier for you to top stitch. And again, we're only stitching the top part of the pocket, not the sides, not the bottom quite yet. And you can back stitch as long as you stay within 1/4 of an inch, because this part will be included in the seam allowance. I'm going to top stitch at about an 1/8 of an inch away from the fold, trying to keep as much as the crest visible as possible. I did forget to increase my stitch length, but it's okay. So this is what it looks like, top stitched. Okay, so now you see what I have my magnetic marker right there with the decoupling. I'm going to take the female part, or no, the male part of a magnetic snap. These are the thin magnetic snaps from Wizardry, which I love, because they won't create any bulk in my pocket, and they have like super firm hold. So using the washer that comes with them, I'm placing the washer where the marking is, and I'm going to draw the 2 vertical lines for the prong. Using the seam ripper, I will just put a slit through them without poking my finger, so be careful. Okay, so now from the outside, I'm coming with a male snap on the outside. and then prongs on the other side. Okay, place your prong and fold. So what you can do right now is grab some duct tape. Oh, I had it here already. A little bit of a duct tape. I got this from the Dollar Tree, so it's not expensive. And I just covered my prongs with it. This way it's not going to snag on the fabric or anything else. So this is what it looks like from the inside. Don't forget to snip your threads. So that's the magnetic snap from the inside, and of course the outside is plain. So now let's add the other part of the magnetic snap, the female part, on your outer front piece. Okay, so the one that has, you see, there's one that has marking already done. So I'm going to do the exact same thing using my washer. I'll just place it where the marking is, draw the two prong lines like so, remove the washer, make sure that your zipper pocket bag is up because you don't want to poke a hole through that, and you're going to poke a hole for the prongs using your seam ripper. So now from the outside, take your female part of the magnetic snap, place it inside here in the two prong holes that you've created. Start with small holes. If you need to make them bigger, you can afterwards. It's very hard to make a small hole or impossible to make a small hole smaller, but it's easier to make it bigger. So start with the small one. There. Okay, so same thing, you put your washer on the back and then you fold your prongs. And I fold my prongs to the side using not my fingers. Anything else you can grab, but not your fingers. And again, I'll add some duct tape just to cover anything that could snag on that pocket. And there you go. And now it's covered. Pocket is done, outside part is done. So now your pocket will be right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to baste with the long stitch. I'm going to baste around the outer part just so it stays in place. It's an optional step, but I encourage you not to skip it because it will help your bag stay in place. When you attach the side gusset. It's one thing less to worry about when you add the gusset, and make sure that you catch all the layers. Just by doing a simple extra basting step here. So I'm matching the raw edges and I'm basting it in place. And I'm doing this with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. This way it will be included in the seam allowance when I attach gusset, so you won't see this basting stitch because the pattern has a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So if I do 1/8, it's not going to be visible. Just remember to move your stitch length back to 2.5. Okay. So your front is ready, and the magnetic snap, and it's an actual pocket now. Ah, the crest is awesome. Okay, so you should have a front, a back, and 2 gusset pieces. Let's work on the gusset pieces right now. So place them right sides together along the longer part. You see there's a shorter end and there's a longer end. You want to place right sides together along the longer end and stitch with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. This way you'll create a longer gusset. Up next, we're going to remove some of the bulkiness in the gusset by simply snipping the corners like so. So you want to snip diagonally like so to remove the bulkiness. If you find it easy to add some double-sided tape along the seam allowance, you can, and that will hold it down, but we're going to top stitch regardless. So with your seam allowance down, I can top stitch from this side because my bobbin and my top are the same color, so they work. If your bobbin doesn't match, top stitch from the other side. Okay, and I'm top stitching the seam allowance with 1/8 of an inch away from the center seam. And I'll show you what it looks like from both sides. And you can backstitch. Okay, this is from the back and this is from the front. And I'm using a directional print, so now both sides will be correct. If you had cut this on fold, then you wouldn't have a correct image on both sides. One would be upside down. But since there's that center seam, you can use it for any fabric you like. Okay, grab your front, and you should have a center marked from yesterday or the day before on the bottom. And you want to match that center with the seam that you just created on the gusset, like so. Okay, I'm going to add 2 clips, one on each side, about 1 inch, just to reinforce the hold. Now I'm going to go with the gusset on the front right here and match the raw edges at the top and the raw edges on the sides. Okay, and again I'm adding 3 clips along the edge on both sides. Same thing here. Okay, so now before we do any additional clipping of clips, we're going to clip with scissors. We're going to snip. Yeah, I'm funny, I know. Make a few snips along where the curve is, about 1/8 to about 1/8 of an inch. This will help along the curve, but you don't want it to go over the 1/4 inch mark, because then it will be, you're snipping into what's on the outside of the fabric. So you want to make sure that the snips will stay inside of your seam allowance, so less than a 1/4 of an inch. So now we're going to pin along that curve, and because we've made these snips, it will be a lot easier to stitch in place, and I will show you a close-up of it pinned in just a second. Having the interfacing outside of the seam allowance it's also helpful in this case. A little too small. Play with the snips, see if you need more than do the ones you made like I did on this side. As long as it stays nice and flat, there's no puckers, then you did it right. So this is what it looks like. Okay. And this is what it looks like with the snips. See, everything is nice and flushed, and you can see the little snips there in between. So now we're going to stitch with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Go slow around the curve to ensure a nice curve with no puckers. And because we basted that pocket earlier, I'm not worried about it being all caught with all the layers, because I know it's all the layers are correct. This is what it looks like stitched. Okay, so we're going to repeat the same thing for the back. Okay, optionally, if you want, you can top stitch your seam allowance towards the gusset with a 3.5 4 stitch length. And on this side it will be pretty easy to top stitch. On the other side it will take some wiggle room. Again, this is an optional step. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm stitching from the inside, grabbing the seam allowance and top stitching it towards the gusset. This is what it looks like top stitch. So now we'll repeat the same thing on the other side. You want to put your center top bottom there, matching the center seam of the gusset. 3 clips, and then again matching the front, 3 clips. You want to snip, if you haven't done so already, snip the gusset straight line. As a rule of thumb, you're going to snip always the straight edge, never the curved edge. So every time you're easing, whether it's bag making or garment making, if you're easing a curved hem into a straight hem, you're going to snip in the straight edge, never in the curved one. Almost done with today's steps. This is really not a hard bag to make. Okay, so let's stitch with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you bring your stitch length back to 2.5. Okay. And like before, you're going to go slow around the curve to make sure there's no puckers on the gusset or the main, front and back. Beautiful. So now if you want to top stitch like you did for the front, to top stitch your seam allowance towards the gusset, you can. You will have to be very wiggly though, because now you're going to have to stitch inside the bag. So if you want to try it, you can. Maybe do it just a little bit at the top. It's up to you. But or you can just leave it without top stitching, because you will have to stitch inside, and I don't know if you want to do that. I guess I could try. And you also want to open your seam allowance. I forgot to mention that last time, to reduce bulk. This is very interesting, to say the least. Stitching, actually, no, I'm going to do the seam allowance towards the gusset because it's complicated enough. Again, optional step. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Don't stress about this step. I'm trying to work more with my feel than with my eyes, because it's hard to see here, and I'm sure with all my arms and all that in the machine, in the camera, I don't know how much you can actually see, but you can't say that I haven't tried. I've done almost one side. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's a lot of fussing that I don't know if I ever want to do again. The first Gaia that I made, I actually skipped this top stitching altogether, and it was just fine. I am halfway there. It is a little harder at the corners. A little harder. This is the best I could do, not perfect by any means, but hey, it is what it is. So now, go ahead and turn your bag, because that is all you have left to do today. You've worked hard, so just take the time to admire your outside of the bag. So let's my threads, and then let's turn. And this is the only time you're turning this because there is no birthing with this bag. It's finished with the binding on the top. Make sure that those top stitches, that top stitching that I did didn't mess up any of my corners or whatnot. Because the whole point was to make it prettier, not the other way around. Nice, but was it worth the effort of top stitching? I don't know. I think it would have been fine without it. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Okay. So now we have an almost bag. Alright my friends, great job today everyone. Thank you for watching day 3. Once you've finished with your outside of the bag, snap a photo and post it in the day 3 comments of the Sew Along album. You can find the Sew Along album in the Backstitch Backroom on Facebook. Link is in the description of this video. That will be your check-in for today. And I will see you back here tomorrow for our lining assembly. Talk to you soon. Bye.